Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
Well, Professor Plum and I do our best to be clear about how to win at selling. Sometimes we can muddy the waters as we debate about the most effective way to get the job done. We can be so confusing that our listeners feel the need to write in and ask us to clarify what we or our guests have said. So if you've been befuddled by our banter, listen in as Scott and I field questions from listeners and other baffling topics on episode 590 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
Every time you do an intro, Bill, I am more intrigued about the episode than I think some of our listeners are.
It's my drama background. I get my drama background.
You really do, and it really grabs me. Wow, that is really good stuff. I can't wait to hear what we talk about.
I can't wait to hear what we talk about. I don't know what we're going to talk about. So
every show is different.
All right.
Hopefully, I listen to some of our old stuff, and I'm like, wow, we have really improved. So thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah, don't listen to the old stuff. Is that what you're saying? Or for fun?
I listen to some of the old stuff. I go, yeah, am I growing, changing? Am I becoming better? And I think we're, like you said, I mean, the banter is engaging, and I think there are listeners that have different points of view. And
we're glad when they write in. We're glad when they write in and challenge us. And
yeah,
it's fun to answer those questions. We write them back.
Exactly.
Not like we get 1,000 of them a day. So folks, if you want to ask a question, feel free to. We'll respond.
So we're covering the book Spin Selling today, chapter 6, the book author Neil Rackham. And the topic is preventing objections. And really, really enjoyed this chapter. It had as different perspective, I think a more proven perspective. And I've really found a contrast between traditional sales training and training built on preventing objections versus handling objections. And I see a lot of sales training topics on handling objections. And in reality, I think we can have a conversation with a prospect where we do not have objections. We have questions, we have clarifications, but we don't necessarily have objections. And in this chapter, keep in mind the book was written in 1988, but the content is still very, very relevant today. What are some of your takeaways from the chapter, just as you started to finish it, Bill, from a context of today's marketplace and how salespeople interact with prospects?
Well, I think first of all, the theme of Neil Rackham in this book is whatever you've been trained on is wrong, and I'm going to show you a better way to do it. Which I can bite into that. The second thing I've been amazed at, and it's been so long ago that I read this. Scott and I talked about it in a conversation yesterday. How closely our training ideas are aligned with a lot of what Neil Rackham talks about, and Challenger Sale, which also has been approved by him, or he wrote the intro to. So if you want to get into our heads a little bit, these two books are going to be good ones for you. And then the third thing is I've told people for years that objections mostly come because you did a lousy job early on in the sales process. You haven't answered questions. You've brought up things you shouldn't have. Last week, we talked about benefits and advantages. And he's going to talk about those in this chapter as well. Yeah. But if we throw in too many features that the people aren't interested in or don't know why we're talking about those are advantages, features that don't connect to a need, we're going to get a lot of questions. No, that's not what I want, or that's too much, or this product must be expensive because it has all these features I don't need. Let me find one that only has the features that I need and is more closely aligned with me. And whenever we're talking about things that the customer isn't interested in, we're bringing up questions in their mind and causing confusion. And that's what I think he's talking about here. Quit causing confusion.
So true. I mean, I think one of the two things that prospects are upset about when working with a salesperson, and I'll even clarify that, an amateur salesperson, is the prospect wants to maintain control, and the prospect does not like salespeople who are assumptive. And when you're introducing stuff that is not part of a conversation, or you didn't bring it up in a question, and you didn't qualify the introduction of new information, and you're presenting stuff that has no interest, the prospect is saying, why are you telling me that? I'm not interested in that. Why are you including that in the price? Because I don't want it. And there lies the rub with, am I getting the best value, or am I overpaying for stuff that I don't need?
Well, and when we talk about things they don't want, they're more than happy to say, I don't really need that, or that doesn't make any sense to me, and that's what we are fielding now as objections. And that's what Neil Rackham's saying in this. You're bringing up the objections yourself because you're talking about things that don't tie into a stated or explicit need.
Yeah, that was very clear in the chapter. It opened with a great story about how objections are buying signs, and Neil Rackham was visiting one of his clients, and one of the sales trainers was doing a sales workshop and talking about how objections are buying signs. And he pulled the instructor aside at the break and said, could we talk a little bit more about that? And he said, yeah, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you made President's Club 3 out of the last 5 years. And if objections are buying signs, I imagine that as you're becoming a member of the President's Clubs, you're getting a lot more objections because those are buying signs, right? Because you're selling more. And the trainer said, no, the complete opposite. I got objections when I was first started selling, first couple of years. So you're selling more in President's Club and you're getting less objections. So objections are not buying signs then. Well, I never thought of it like that before. And you just looked at a different position. And how many times, salespeople, listeners, our listeners, how many times have you heard somebody that does sales training saying objections are buying signs? I've said it. And I'm wrong. I'm wrong. These are some of the things where I meet somebody.
Wait a minute. I got to write this down. This down. This is November 15th. But we're doing this 8:15 in the morning.
Oh, geez.
Now mark that. Mark that. I'm going to highlight that part of the tape.
Anybody thinks that I've got a big head or I'm arrogant. This is a recording that says, no, I admit when I'm wrong. But people have come up to me 20 years after they've met me and they say, I was in one of your programs. And I said, oh my goodness. Okay, tell me, when was it? How long ago? What did I talk about?
I've grown up since then. Thank goodness.
Yeah, I need to walk some things back.
That's right. That's right. Well, it's interesting because when he talks about objections, I hear this from people. I always get this objection, ABC. And I say, why don't you have a strategy to get rid of that objection early? Why are you getting that late? And now you don't know what to do with it because it's become an objection you have to overcome instead of something you handled early on in the process and had a conversation about. Price is one of those big ones. If you don't want to ever talk about price is going to become an objection at the end, and now you're going to have to deal with it as this big barrier to get over. So be careful that you're not causing some of the objections yourself, and that's what he's talking about in this chapter.
Exactly. And when somebody says to me, I always get this objection, I go, why do you suppose that is? And they go, what do you mean? I go, there's one thing in common with every conversation that you have. Your prospects are not collaborating against you. They don't even know each other. But what are you saying that's causing that objection? What do you mean? I go, are you really listening to the objection and wondering and scratching your head going, why is it that they're always bringing that up? And then think about what it is that you're saying that causes them to react that way, because they're being defensive. Prospects are being defensive when they want to protect their current state. And when you challenge them without that engagement of trust and rapport in that relationship, they're going to push back and defend their current position. So like you said, Bill, in the book, this is right out of the book, objections, contrary to common beliefs, are often more created by the salesperson than the customer.
Right. And as my dad used to say, my military father used to say, quit pooping in your own mess kit.
Yeah, exactly.
And we say things. Let's go back to the kid coming to your door trying to sell candy bars for the football team. He opens it up and says, "You wouldn't want to buy a candy bar, would you?" Right. And then he wonders why we say no, because we just gave him the answer that he was basically asking for. I have a mug, Scott, and I've kind of always believed it, but I want you to get your opinion on this because I'm changing my mind. It says salesmanship begins when the customer says no. How do you think about that in terms of preventing objections?
I've had agreements, sales transactions close after the customer says no, but I believe the sales conversation starts at the first exchange of information and a conversation, an email. We have just started a conversation about persuasion and influence and looking for a better way of doing something and asking somebody to change and accept a better way in exchange for a dollar or an instrument of value. And that's how I think a relationship starts when sales. So
Well,
what's your position?
here's what I've been thinking about,
Yeah.
and in terms of this chapter, my goal is to get them to not say no, because once they've said
Mm.
no, created an objection, now
Mm-hmm.
I have a hurdle I have to overcome, and I have to change their mind. My
Mm-hmm.
goal is in my conversation to get them to say yes more often, to
Mm.
agree with me by only talking about things that they're interested in or are differentiators for us that we can show provide value for them that they might not have thought of.
Mm.
But once they've said no, now they have a mental barrier that has to be overcome. Once they've given an objection, they start to own that objection,
Mm.
and it becomes more powerful. And that's what Rackham's talking about in this. You prevent objections by not letting them come up, by not pooping in your own mess kit, and by
Mm-hmm.
not causing things to happen because you're talking about dumb things.
Right. So true. So as the chapter closes, he brings up 2 points. Objections early in a sales call. So most objections are to solutions that don't fit needs. Don't talk about solutions until you've asked enough questions to develop strong needs. So get more information, identify those explicit and implied needs that he talks about earlier in the book. And then the second point that he brings up, objections about value. You're not developing needs strongly enough.
Mm-hmm.
And every prospect is comparing a dollar against an exchange of value and how the solution applies to their needs. And if there's not, and there's a great illustration about a table, a teeter-totter, right? Is that teeter-totter? That's what they are, right? And how they explain the features, values, and benefits against a dollar bill. And those feature advantages and benefits need to weigh more than a dollar bill. So now they go, that's a great exchange of value between the two. And it was just a great illustration. It's not too late to start listening to us talk about the book and to pick up the book if you haven't done it so far.
Yeah, I just want to make one more point,
Yeah,
and it's in
please.
that same vein that you finished with there, Scott. On page 127, he's got a chapter title called The Cure, and he does 2 conversations. One conversation where they bring up a point and an objection comes up, and then the second conversation, which is much longer, where he does exactly what Scott talks about here, to build up a need. And I think that we don't know how to have that conversation to build up a need. We ask them a question, and then they say no, and we go, okay. We don't examine it. We don't offer ideas. We don't put more solutions on the table. And those 2 conversation comparisons are very good. So take a moment to look at those. So
Yeah, great chapter. I'm looking forward to the next one too.
next week we got, not next week. Next week we have a guest. But after that, we're going to do chapter 7, which is called Opening the Call. And it's kind of about the preliminaries. So he's going backwards a little bit on this, but it should be fun. Today, our topic is questions from listeners. Scott and I each picked out 3 questions that we liked, and we'll read those questions, and then one of us will give a little answer, and the other one will either rebut it or add to it. So
here we go.
Question 1 from David in Tallahassee. I wanted to reinforce our value drivers for a client that we've been working with for a few years. But when I tried to talk about it, she just wanted me to get the quote to her ASAP. What could I have done better? Well, I think the key on this is we've worked with for a few years. And when we've worked with a company for a few years, it's really hard to go back to the beginning and show them value all at one time, or have that value discussion as kind of this separate, let's talk about value. They have decided that you are valuable. If you've worked with them for a few years, they understand some or all of your value drivers, and they've made the decision that that's who they want to do business with. Now, if they start to falter and say, well, somebody else beat you in a quote, then you have an opportunity to talk about what value you're giving versus what value they're giving. You may also have opportunities to come in and say, hey, Larry or Marcy or Mary or whoever you're working with, are you guys enjoying the fact that we do X, Y, Z? Has that been important to you? And find out if that's a value driver for them, or if they even understand what's going on. So have that question in mind. Have a couple of those things where you can just talk casually when they're asking for a quote or asking for some new product. hey, this is something that we've spent money doing. Is this important to you? And
Mm.
just do it one at a time rather than trying to have a long value conversation. Scott, your thoughts?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the real difference in this question is that there's an existing relationship that's lasted for a few years. So I'm kind of puzzled as to why an existing relationship they'd ask for a quote in a way where it's kind of a we're going to accept it or not accept it versus having a relationship with a salesperson to saying, let's work together on coming up with a solution and a budget as to how much we have to allocate to this in order to make the fair exchange, for you to say yes to our quote and our proposal on how to solve it. And if there was not an existing relationship and a prospect came to and called up a salesperson, and of course we've all had these calls where the prospect is so happy and so jovial and so responsive and so attentive and so free flowing of information, and we give them a quote, and then all of a sudden cue the crickets. We don't hear them, from them for 2 or 3 or never. They go silent after. What happened here? Because there was no relationship established, and you have to ask yourself, what kind of relationship do I want to have with this person after the quote? Do I want to work with them or not? And if we're jumping right to the quote without learning more about the company or the philosophy, etc., then I don't think there's going to be much of a relationship in that point.
Well, I think again, they've already said they've got a couple year relationship.
Right,
So
exactly. There's a
so they're
difference.
buying products on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're getting a quote on a series of products or whatever, I would assume. I think that happens all the time. Somebody, if I'm selling, parts for lawnmowers or whatever, I'm not going to say, let's do a formal proposal for you every time they want a
Yeah,
new price on blades, right?
right.
So I think you have to interject these things a little at a time and try and get a feeling from whether it's purchasing or whoever you're talking to, the field maintenance people, what they like about doing business with you, so you can
Mm-hmm.
reinforce that. So, all
Right.
right, what's your first question?
Question. First one is Sam from Sacramento entered the book drawing. We're doing that book drawing. I think we have a couple left of the book from Mike Weinberg, first time sales manager. And the question is, why do people answering the phone seem so unhappy? What can I do different? And this is really an interesting question. I've never heard it before, as to why prospects are coming across guarded, irritable when a salesperson does finally get a hold of them. They just don't want to be sharing information free flowingly. And every question, of course, every salesperson has open ended or close ended, but a lot of salespeople ask closed ended questions and they just get no, no, no. And then it's like, why are you being so uncooperative? And my and I'm suspecting that you're not sounding different when you talk to a prospect that is somewhat qualified because you've done some research. They fit into the area that you sell in based on past experiences that you've had from customers. And they're just not sharing a lot of information because you're not sounding any different. And when I work with a salesperson that sounds the same, just like everybody else, I just lose interest. I become short and irritable. I just want to get the conversation over with. And it's not a relationship that's going to go and grow. And it's just amazing. There are some industries that are dominated by salespeople that all sound the same. And it's like, wow, you really need to separate yourself in order for you to sell more. Have you dealt with these unhappy people when you call on them, Bill?
Well, I am one of them.
Oh, okay.
As you said, sometimes I just don't have a need when somebody calls, and therefore I'd rather shut them down quickly because I'm not gonna be bothered. But
Hmm.
when I think about some clients of ours that talk to the same people over and over again, or they've got products that a manufacturer needs, for example, I don't think they ask the right questions. I don't think they ask, if I were to call you and I'm selling you some kind of parts that you already buy from somebody else, your first thing to say is, well, I already have a vendor who's selling me that.
Mm.
Right. And so my option is to say, okay, or to have good questions to ask.
Hmm.
Right. And things like, well, of course you have a vendor. If you didn't have a vendor to sell you these parts that you manufacture with, you'd be out of business. What I want to ask you is, do you need a second vendor, or is there something that somebody could do better than your current vendors?
Mm.
Right? They're not looking, they're not searching, they don't have some questions ready. And instead they go, well, here's what we do, blah, 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 blah. And they,
Right.
they're taught the never shut up and allow them to hang up on you. So they get mad because they get hung up on without the person saying anything, because they never asked a decent question to get that person engaged. So
Right.
ask good questions, and if you hit them right, you might be able to get some response. And if you don't, they're just too busy that day. Cold calling is a tough job. And so if you're answering the phone and you don't have a relationship, you can have an expectation they're going to be a little bit irritable. Get ready to deal with it.
Yeah. So just sound differently when you're on the phone with them. And one thing that I took away from the book, The Challenger Sale, is lead to the solution, not with it. And too often, I think salespeople lead with solutions. And when the prospect's not interested, they become short. They become real curt when they're dealing with people because, there's no interest there and there's plenty of things to do.
They didn't catch their attention. You got to, it's attention first. You got to catch their attention on the call.
Yeah.
All right. My question number 2 is from Tammy in St. Paul. You don't talk much about closing the sale, she has in quotes. Your philosophy seems to be that if I do everything right, I won't need to use a close. Well, you're hearing me right, Tammy.
Yeah.
But what do I do when a prospect can't seem to make a decision? Okay, so this really goes back to what we just talked about with the spin selling, right? This was our whole conversation about closing the sale. Do we close it? Do we really need to close it? Well, we don't have objections if we've dealt with it right, and we don't have a big drum roll close. We're leading toward the close, and the customer is starting to ask buying questions instead of hesitancy objections, right? So I don't have a lot of closes. I use a couple. I like the assumptive close, which is just to say, when do you want to start instead of do you want to start? And how many people are going to be in the training sessions, right? But when you have somebody that can't make a decision, you may have to ask them to make a decision. And my ultimate one that I use to close them at the end, if I've been back and forth 7 times with them, this isn't the first close, is you want to tell me no close. And I know you have something similar. And I just say, Scott, it sounds like you want to tell me no. And if they want to tell me no, here's their opportunity. If they hesitate, then I say, Scott, there's only one other answer, and that's yes. What do we need to do to get this finished up so both of us can move on?
Yeah.
And so I think you do have to have some closes, but they're not real heavy-handed. They're not the 2,700 Tom Hopkins closes.
Yeah. And sometimes that close, when salespeople get excited about because they want to shorten their sales cycle, so they end up stepping up the closing process a little sooner. And they don't
ABC, always be closing. No, always be closing.
I do a cold call. I interrupt somebody in the day. I have a 2-minute conversation with them, and then I want to close them. Wait a minute here. I don't think that's going to last very long. And so they put too much emphasis on that. And it's amazing when salespeople do not become overly eager and they become sort of, it's not really passive, but they're really meeting a prospect in the middle so that they can collaborate on a relationship and work together into the future. I mean, so much of the relationship is really defined in that first conversation and the expectations. And it's a two-way street. As a salesperson, do you want to have a relationship with somebody that says, just send me the quote? I don't think I want to have that kind of relationship, because if there's no type of foundation that's just built on a quote and a price, I don't know. I got better things to do than just send out quotes to people. I want to have a lasting, long relationship, and I want to be accountable for my reputation, and I want to deliver results, and I really want to focus on delivering more than the prospect is expecting from me. And I don't want to have a relationship with just send me a quote type of deals. It just doesn't work.
All right. What's your next question?
My next one is Molly from Milwaukee writes, I've been with the company for over 10 years, and my new manager wants us to start using our new CRM. This has reduced my prospecting time, and I don't know why I need to document every conversation and log every email. I'm measured on results, and I don't see how typing in notes will increase my sales numbers. All those that are in favor of this position, raise your hand. This is normal for salespeople. I don't want to type stuff into a CRM. Why am I doing this? This is such a waste. This isn't going to turn into anything. And this conversation was just kind of to, get information out of me and offer free consulting. I'm not going to put it in there because it's not going to go anywhere. 3 weeks later, they call back and they say, yeah, we're interested in continuing that conversation. And you're going, what? Wait a minute.
What conversation?
Yeah. What did we talk about? Oh, now you got to start all. Now your stock is going down significantly, and now you got to try to repair it. And what kind of concessions are you going to offer because you didn't take that first conversation seriously? Or as a salesperson, how many conversations can you manage in your head? I can do about 2 on a good day. And we're having relationships, and I've asked salespeople that have multiple accounts, key accounts with multiple transactions, how many accounts do you manage in your territory? And in some cases, they've got 300 different accounts. How do you keep track of everything? You just can't. The CRM is built to be able to provide the information that you need when you need it and to keep you focused on the behaviors. What are you going to do tomorrow? If you don't have a CRM that's managing all of your pending activities and scheduling all of the future tasks and following through on all the commitments that you've made to prospects, how are you doing that and still delivering the credibility and value that your customers and clients and prospects are expecting from you? I don't know of a better way than a CRM, Bill. So
Yeah, it's a great
what's your
tool.
experience?
It's been a great tool for all salespeople if they're willing to use it. I would say get some technology that will help you. Can you have a transcribing system?
Yeah,
So if you're doing a phone
many of them
call,
do.
have a transcription done and just add that transcription, and then you can briefly look over it when you need to make the next one. I don't type a lot anymore when I'm doing customer notes. I have speech speech recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I just say what happened. And it may not be a wonderful note, may not be totally grammatically correct, but it gets the idea in there. And here's the real need for CRM. You're not the only one in that company who's touching on that client.
Mm-hmm.
Other people have to deliver. They have to find out what you promised, and the orders have to be in. Everything should be connected to that client. So when somebody else has to take a look at it, your inside salesperson, they don't have to make a phone call to you and say, what the heck happened here? What did you promise? Now I don't know what I'm supposed to deliver. So it's a great tool when you're going to manage, if it's just you and me, hey, maybe we have less communication. But if I've got a big company, everyone needs to know what's going on with that client. So that's what I would say.
Great. Let's do one more and move on.
All right. From Renee in Manila. And I was excited to get a note from Manila. We have a lot of listeners in the Philippines and in Indonesia. And so it's always nice to hear from our friends there. Also, I spent 3 years, my formative years during the Vietnam War. I lived in the Philippines. So I always liked the Philippines. Wonderful people. Okay, here's Renee's question. I heard your interview with Mike Weinberg, and it seems that my sales manager is making all of the mistakes he mentioned. He spends his time looking at Salesforce and sending us notes about our sales funnel and other metrics. No coaching, no training, no ride-alongs. What can I do to change him? Nothing.
Yeah.
I don't try to change other people. It's a fruitless act. I try to change myself. So if you're not getting coaching or training, listen to more podcasts. If you're not getting ride-alongs, that's a great time to listen to podcasts. If you have a question, ask him or her directly. But you're not going to change your sales manager. You need to change yourself. So find tools that you can use to get better. Invest in yourself. Every good salesperson has invested in themselves. Don't wait for your company to invest in you. Read a book, listen to a podcast, watch a video, have an organized program, and get better.
So true. And how many podcasts have we done? We're on episode 590 right now. I mean,
Yep, 190.
190 episodes. I mean, it's just so many topics. And just grateful for all of our listeners from around the world, and so grateful for the feedback and the questions. Bill and I love the questions. And one of the goals of this podcast is for us to deliver relevant information that is going to make you more productive in the role that you have, whether it be a leader of a company, a sales manager, or a salesperson. Those are the 3 categories that we target. If you're interested in having a conversation with Bill and I, send us an email. Let's start a conversation, and you never know where it goes. And every relationship starts with a conversation. So thank you.
And we can work with our friends in Indonesia and Manila and all around the world, because now we have Zoom or Teams or whatever technology you use. And we've done a lot of international training. So we love to talk.
Yeah, it is. We welcome your calls and emails and LinkedIn invites. So our golden nugget today is: don't wish it was easier. Wish you were better. Don't wish for less problems. Wish for more skills. Don't wish for less challenge. Wish for more wisdom. By the famous Jim Rohn. Did you recognize that one, Bill?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, our friend Scott
Welly,
Welly
exactly.
just had that on. Is that where you picked it up?
Exactly where I
Yeah,
got it. I
yeah.
just follow that guy. He is so wise,
He's a
and
great
he's
speaker.
so humble and
Yeah.
just so accomplished. And we've
Great guy.
interviewed
But
him.
yeah, I've always, been told, be careful. Don't wish for patience, or your God's going to give you opportunities to be
Exactly.
patient. So I don't pray for those things because I don't want the challenge that's going to be coming my way if I ask for more wisdom,
Exactly.
or if I ask for more skills, I'm alone get this problem. So God,
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah,
I'll just
yeah.
keep moving along here. So that's a
Exactly.
great quote.
Yeah, it is. It is.
All right. For all this information, go to winningatselling.com. That's our show page. You can look for information, and you can go back almost 3 years and listen to the shows. More than 3 years.
Yeah,
150, 156 shows. We've done more than that. So we're working toward year 4. My goodness. So lots of wisdom. If you wish for more wisdom, listen to Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Listen to Bill with his experience. All great contributors. So next week, we're going to have a guest, Kelly Shutra, and the topic is going to be on thought leadership activation. So that'll be a very, very good discussion.
Yeah, I had a great discussion with her. I'm looking forward to that interview. Subscribe, share this podcast with your colleagues on your social media. Connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to do that. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.